We are going to move to our next item, which is item number 7. And this is an action item where we will consider and potentially adopt the 30 by 30 roadmap decision-making framework for coastal waters. And I have some sort of context-setting comments, but I'm going to hold off on those, and I'll invite Mike Escrow, who is the Senior Biodiversity Program Manager, as well as the Tribal Liaison at the OPC, to present. Welcome, Mike.
Thank you, Secretary Crowfoot. Thank you, council members. Yeah, I'm Mike Escrow. I lead our biodiversity and tribal affairs work here at OPC. And I'm really excited. I'm really proud to be presenting our final roadmap. Many years really in the making to achieving 30 by 30 in our coastal waters today. So next slide, please. So let's start by level setting and grounding ourselves in our state's 30 by 30 goal. So as we know, in 2020, Governor Newsom issued this ambitious executive order committing our state to conserving 30% of our lands and our coastal waters by 2030. And 2 years after that, after an extensive public process, the Resources Agency released Pathways to 30 by 30, which is this really groundbreaking strategy document that provides an ambitious definition of a 30 by 30 conservation area for California, and then also establishes 10 pathways for how we're going to achieve that ambitious goal. Next slide, please. And when we talk about 30 by 30 and we talk about protecting biodiversity as that primary key objective of the initiative, what we're really talking about is protecting California's really incredible diversity of life, from individual species all the way to entire ecosystems. But there are other priorities in Pathways to 30 by 30 as well, expanding access to nature and building resilience to climate change. And I think when you look at Pathways, what really shines through to me is that this is a document that supports conservation action that helps people and nature thrive together. So for us in the ocean, what that means is that conservation actions, 30 by 30 conservation areas, can both provide a high degree of biodiversity protection, but also allow for those sustainably managed activities like fishing, boating, diving, as long as biodiversity conflicts are minimized. Next slide, please. So since the establishment of the 30 by 30 target, we've been working really closely with fishermen, with conservation organizations, with Native American tribes, with key partners up and down the coast to chart a course for how we're going to translate that definition in coastal waters and how we're going to achieve this ambitious goal. And I also think it's important to just kind of zoom out for a second and remind ourselves that 30 by 30 is just one small piece of all of the work that OPC is doing on protecting coastal and marine biodiversity. So that's sea level rise adaptation and coastal resilience, that's ocean acidification and hypoxia, all the work we've done on kelp forest protection and restoration and marine protected area monitoring and evaluation, as well as our emergence really, if I may say so, as a global leader, I think, in marine conservation. Next slide, please. So when Pathways to 30 by 30 was initially published, the state counted the area covered by our marine protected area network as 30 by 30 conserved areas. And so I'm going to explain a little bit about why we made that initial call. So California's 124 MPAs were designed and are managed to function as an ecologically cohesive network that protects biodiversity across the state. The vast majority of this network has a very high level of protection. More than half of the network is fully protected by no-take state marine reserves. And we have extensive monitoring and evaluation data, including data looking at the connectivity between these individual MPAs that really shows the extent to which these areas are providing meaningful protections for biodiversity, including in the first 10-year management review of the MPA network that was released a couple of years ago. And I just could not be more thrilled about the news that you shared earlier, Secretary Crowfoot, about our addition to the Green List, really recognizing this entire network, the first nature network in the world, as the gold standard of marine conservation. So we feel really, really confident in that initial determination. But we also realized that there was still some clarity we needed to provide. And so following the release of that Pathways document, we embarked on this process to develop refined guidance for applying this very strong definition in Pathways to 30 by 30 to coastal waters, and to update our accounting of the conserved acres that we had provided in Pathways. So next slide, please. So before we get into the meat of the roadmap, I just kind of want to reflect a little bit on our journey. Like I said, it's been many years in the making, our 30 by 30 journey here, and I'd be really remiss if I didn't thank Abby Mohan, also my colleague, Dr. Ann Deep. Both have since moved on to more senior positions, but they were instrumental in a lot of the work I'm going to talk about, as well as Dr. Stacy Lewis, who jumped in really after that staff shuffle and really helped bring this plane home. So really, really appreciate all of you. This engagement really started following the publication of Pathways. Initial conversations with key partners, really helping to build out our 4 approaches, which I'm going to talk about in a little bit, which we've been consistent on for the last several years for how we're going to achieve 30 by 30 in the ocean. And that has included several periodic updates to the council that have provided a really good venue for public comment and council member direction as well. Next slide, please. Another really important next step, or step in this process, was that technical advisory panel that Dr. Whiteman referenced earlier. Some really, really key experts from across the world in area-based marine conservation that helped us translate some of these high-level policy objectives for 30 by 30 into more concrete criteria. That technical advisory panel helped us develop that draft decision-making framework we talked about a little bit earlier that was presented a year ago, last June. And as you'll recall, the presentation of that framework launched a really robust 4-month public comment and tribal consultation period that included public workshops and tribal roundtables up and down the state. We went from Arcata to Monterey to San Diego to really hear more from tribes and local communities about their priorities for 30 by 30, any concerns they might have, and really how this initiative could benefit conservation in their specific local region. So those were really, really valuable conversations. Next slide, please. And we also had some incredible opportunities last year towards the end of that public comment period. We held a dedicated public workshop at the 30 by 30 partnership last summer that was really productive. We also had the incredible opportunity to discuss this framework with international partners at the United Nations Biodiversity Summit in Colombia, and really heard a lot of really admiration for the level of ambition that California was setting with this decision-making framework. Next slide, please. So we summarized all of that. Oh, I'm sorry, back up one more slide. Sorry about that. So we summarized all of that feedback back in December and heard, again, additional public comment and council member direction. And I would just say the final roadmap really represents a tremendous amount of thought and work. And I'm not just talking about the 3 years of work by the OPC team, but really our engagement with, we tallied it up, it's more than 1,000 Californians who have directly provided input into this draft framework. And I know there are a lot of diverse opinions on how we can best get to 30 by 30. I think we're probably going to hear a lot of different opinions and thoughts during public comment, but we really interpreted this interest and excitement and level of engagement as a testament to how much people care and how much people really want to protect our coast and ocean. Next slide, please. So for those of you who are familiar with the draft decision-making framework that we released last year, you'll see not very much has changed as we start to march through these slides and talk a little bit more about the final roadmap. The fundamentals of how we're making decisions remains the same. We're using the same science-based tools in the same ways as recommended by the technical advisory panel, but we have made a couple of significant changes that I want to call out. So first, we have added a dedicated pathway for tribal stewardship areas, and we did this in direct response to comments that we heard from tribes during consultation, as well as new global guidance for recognizing and respecting what the international community calls indigenous conserved areas. So we made that change, and we also removed access and climate as determinative elements of the framework. So previously, an area that had less biodiversity protection could count if it provided access or climate benefits. We are now still obviously considering access and climate, but we're recentering biodiversity. So areas cannot count as 30 by 30 conservation areas unless they allow that or provide that high level of environmental protection. And I also think it's really critical to emphasize this roadmap is fully intended to build on, but not to replace Pathways to 30 by 30. So this roadmap upholds and reaffirms all of those core commitments and priority actions that are in that document. So let's talk about definitions, the first key part of the roadmap here. Pathways, as we know, defines 30 by 30 conservation areas as land and coastal water areas that are durably protected, principally for biodiversity benefit. So note that this definition includes those two fundamental elements, right? Let's get into those in a little bit more detail. Next slide, please. So durable protection is defined in Pathways to 30 by 30 essentially as areas that have gone through some sort of formal rulemaking process that can't be easily undone. So if you think about California's MPA network, for example, which was established through California Fish and Game Code, that easily meets this bar, but a temporary protection or a seasonal closure would not meet that durability bar. Next slide, please. Now, the second part of the definition, this management principally for biodiversity benefit, is a little bit more complex. And Pathways to 30 by 30 is really explicit in saying that 30 by 30 conservation areas can take many different forms, have their own management plans, have their own metrics and methods of evaluating success, but they all have to provide that high degree of environmental protection to count. So let's talk about some of these different types of areas in coastal waters in more detail. Next slide, please. So let's start with this new pathway I talked about, this tribal stewardship pathway. These we're defining as areas that are formally and collaboratively managed and stewarded and cared for by tribes in ways that achieve significant biodiversity benefits. Like I said, we added this pathway directly in response to comments received from tribes. And the comments that we heard were really, look, conservation and stewardship have always been part of tribal cultural lifeways. And we know that the separation of tribes from their ancestral homelands, from their traditional practices, has harmed not just tribes, not just people, but also nature. And so really restoring and revitalizing that tribal stewardship is a key component of protecting biodiversity. And a really exciting flagship example of a tribal stewardship area in California's coastal waters is the new Chumash Heritage National Marine Sanctuary. Next slide, please. So the Chumash Sanctuary was designated last year after a decades-long effort that was championed by local Chumash tribes. And it is completely unique among California sanctuaries, unique to the extent that we felt it's best evaluated via this new special and separate pathway. The sanctuary protects an area of high biocultural significance, which is a concept in Pathways to 30 by, that's referenced in Pathways to 30 by 30, that really accounts for that deep interconnectedness of people and of place. And this sanctuary does not just have a management plan focused on biodiversity, it has a management plan that's ecosystem-based, but inspired by tribal values. And those tribal values and priorities are woven through 12 individual action plans that are part of the management plan that focus on things like water quality, resource protection, climate change, and wildlife. And maybe most important of all, this management plan includes this explicit and binding framework for collaborative co-stewardship between the federal government, state government, and Native American tribes. And that's completely unique among sanctuaries. So Chumash represents just under 6% of coastal waters. Next slide, please. So now let's shift gears away from these tribal stewardship areas and towards formal marine protected areas. So these are areas that are set aside for long-term conservation intentionally. And the MPA guide, which is a science-based tool, can really help us evaluate not just the quantity of protection, but also the quality of protection in formal MPAs. Fully or highly protected MPAs have the greatest potential to protect and restore nature because they allow no or very limited extractive or destructive activity with very low total impact on biodiversity. So an example is California's MPA network, like we talked about earlier, which functions as that one cohesive, highly protected network. Next slide, please. Now, lightly protected MPAs are a little bit more complicated. This is a really, really broad category that includes areas that may benefit some habitats and species, but allow a moderate level of extractive or destructive activity that may have some kind of moderate or intermediate impact on biodiversity. And so it's a really, really broad category that is a spectrum. It includes some MPAs that are very, very close to fully or highly protected. It also includes some MPAs that are more closely on the minimally protected end of the spectrum. And so what we're proposing to do with these is to go through these areas case by case. There's not very many of them. They represent about 3% of California's coastal waters. And so we propose to really look at these areas and identify what are the actual conservation benefits being provided by these lightly protected MPAs, and most importantly, what opportunities might there be to strengthen protection in these areas. Next slide, please. And finally, minimally protected MPAs. These are areas that allow significant extractive or destructive activity with high total impact on biodiversity. And so these areas, just categorically, we are saying will not count as 30 by 30 conservation areas. But that's not to say they're not important. They may still provide, important economic or recreational benefits. Next slide, please. And finally, our coastal waters contain a lot of different designations that are not formal MPAs, but might still contribute to biodiversity conservation in some way. These we're also proposing to evaluate on a case-by-case basis. And there's a tool, an international tool that can help with this, put out by IUCN, and this is detailed in the roadmap and the draft framework, that really focuses in on specific criteria that get to the question of how do these areas provide protection for the whole ecosystem? So that's really what you're looking for when we look through these areas. We have not done a full assessment yet, but one example that we're confident in counting right now is the University of California Natural Reserve System. So this is a really perfect example. These areas restrict commercial and recreational activity, basically to make natural, undisturbed lands and waters available for research and teaching. And so they're not formal MPAs, but by doing that, they're protecting the whole ecosystem. So we're really excited to add these to our tally as well. Next slide, please. So with the adoption of this roadmap, California will stand at 21.9% of coastal waters conserved. So this includes the 16.2% already accounted for in pathways, an additional 5.7% from the Chumash National Marine Sanctuary, excluding the overlap with what's already counted. And then the UC reserves, unfortunately, they don't get us a ton of acres. It's about 150 across the whole state, but we will take everything we can get. And we're very, very excited about the conservation benefits that these areas provide. Next slide, please. So with that number, I'm really thrilled to stand here and report that at the halfway point of this initiative, we're more than 3/4 of the way to our goal with the adoption of this roadmap. But this is not the time to take our foot off the gas. First of all, designation is only the beginning. These areas are not necessarily perfect, and there might be opportunities even in areas that are already counted for 30 by 30 to further strengthen biodiversity protection. We also, to meet our goal, have an additional 275,000 acres of coastal waters to conserve by 2030. So I'm gonna go through those in a bit more detail right now, because that's really the second key part of the roadmap, not just how we're making decisions, but what are we gonna do for the next 5 years to make sure we meet our target. Next slide, please. So as we've discussed over the last couple of years at many different council meetings, we've identified 4 key approaches for getting to 30 by 30 in coastal waters. MPAs are a really important part of that, but we're adopting this portfolio approach that recognizes conservation is not one size fits all. Next slide, please. The first step is the adaptive management of California's MPAs. So managing our network to make sure that it continues to provide those strong protections for biodiversity, especially as our climate changes, is a really key component of achieving the 30 by 30 goal. And this is including not just evaluation of petitions that were recently received for MPA change. We're supporting our Department of Fish and Wildlife and Fish and Game Commission partners in that effort, but also other adaptive management actions like strengthening tribal co-management, like protecting water quality or strengthening water quality protections. And I think anytime we talk about MPAs in 30 by 30, it's critical to make this point that while MPAs are a really core component of how we're achieving 30 by 30, and any boundary modifications or adjustments or new MPAs as part of this adaptive management process would count, that process is not being driven by 30 by 30, right? It is driven by the Marine Life Protection Act, the management plan of the MPA network via the Fish and Game Commission's public process. Next slide, please. So our next approach focuses on national marine sanctuaries. Like I said, the Chumash Sanctuary is the first sanctuary to count in California's coastal waters because we felt it was most appropriately evaluated via that separate tribal stewardship pathway. because of all the ways we just talked about in which it is unique. But we need to look at all the other sanctuaries. We need to look at them individually and assess them via that MPA pathway to understand the protections they're providing for biodiversity and their alignment with our definition of a 30 by 30 conservation area. So despite all the changes in federal leadership, despite all the changes at sanctuaries, we still remain committed to working with sanctuary leadership and staff to really think about how we can look at the health of sanctuaries and identify opportunities where the state can plug in to support biodiversity conservation. And that includes our ongoing and really productive, I would say, collaboration with the Farallones National Marine Sanctuary on updating their management plan. So that process has been extended by a couple of years, but we're still in the weeds on that management plan, helping to align it with our 30 by 30 conservation priorities. Next slide, please. Our next approach is focused on tribally led conservation and indigenous marine stewardship areas. So, one important way in which we're upholding that core commitment in pathways to support tribally led conservation is by supporting and exploring this new concept of indigenous marine stewardship areas. So these areas, and we already heard a public comment at the last item about this, these areas are envisioned in pathways as special areas designated and managed by tribes for biodiversity benefit. And we're committed to supporting this by not just developing a formal pathway for the state to recognize and lift up and support these areas, but also by funding the development of IMSA monitoring plans or management plans, and then also funding tribally led monitoring and stewardship programs. And these areas, just to be very clear, would be considered also via that tribal stewardship pathway in our decision-making process. Next slide. And finally, like we talked about, we've got all of these different kinds of areas, the lightly protected MPAs, the non-MPA areas that we have not had time to fully assess yet. We want to make sure we're doing that transparently and with adequate scientific and public input. So these would be, national estuary and research reserves, wildlife refuges, national seashores, those non-MPA areas like state water quality protected areas. Next slide, please. And while we haven't sketched out concrete evaluation criteria yet, some examples of the types of criteria we would want to ask about these areas are things like, does the area have a management plan that's focused on biodiversity, right? Are there any extractive or destructive activities happening that could reduce biodiversity? And on the flip side, are there stewardship activities happening that could support biodiversity? And again, like we're asking about all these areas, could protections be strengthened to improve conservation based on what the actual threats in that region are? Next slide, please. So we're planning to kick off this evaluation process by hosting a public webinar this summer to share a little bit more information and opportunities to provide input. And we'll be undertaking this case-by-case evaluation in very close partnership with the managing agencies of these areas and other key partners, tribes, conservation community, fishing community, ocean data partners. And we're looking at sharing results and recommendations from this case-by-case evaluation, including any update to the percent of coastal waters conserved with the next Pathways Progress Report. Next slide, please. So to wrap us up, staff is recommending today that you adopt the roadmap to achieving 30 by 30 in our coastal waters, which will bring our total area conserved to 21.9% and chart what we really see as an ambitious but achievable goal to meet our target in the next 5 years. Next slide, please. So thank you so much for your time with that presentation. I'm looking forward to public comment, and Jen and I are here to answer any questions you might have after public comment.
Thanks so much, Mike. We will entertain council member comments and questions after public comment. We'll move to that now. I want to recognize we typically defer to other governmental leaders to kick off public comment. And my understanding is that there may be tribal leaders joining us either here in person or remotely by the phone or Zoom. So I would ask first that we move to tribal leader comment. So if you are representing a tribal government or tribe, I should say, and you are here virtually on Zoom or on the phone, please make yourself known and our team will identify you. And then if there's any tribal leader in the room speaking on behalf of a tribe, please come to the podium. Does not look like there's any leader here in the room in person, so let's move to virtual.
I believe we do. We'll try Violet Sage Walker. Violet? You have the floor.
Thank you. Thank you, Secretary Crowfoot and the entire council for the discussion today. It would be the honor of my lifetime to see Chumash Heritage National Marine Sanctuary part of the 30 by 30 goals. And I'd like to thank Michael again for all the hard work and Jen Eckerly and all the staff at OPC for working on this excellent work and tribal consultation with this roadmap and strategic plan that they've presented to us. Last year, we celebrated, as you all know, the final designation of the Chumash Heritage National Marine Sanctuary. We've been working to protect this part of the coastline for threats for nearly 3 generations, going back more than 50 years. That being said, I am concerned as national leadership has removed so much of the funding, so much of the staff, and potentially co-management directives from marine sanctuaries and all protected areas, frankly, in the United States in general. Unfortunately, Chumash has not avoided some of these pitfalls that we're facing on a global national scale. I'd like to just say that I don't feel that Chumash Sanctuary has what we would consider durable protections at this point. And even though it is a new pathway for tribal stewards area to enter into the 30 by 30, it would be an example to the world of California leading the way and California tribes protecting marine protected areas completely for biocultural reasons and biodiversity reasons. At this point, I'd like to ask OPC and California to take up some of the slack and the uncertainty that we're all feeling, where the management plan may fall short of its original intentions. The funding may fall short of its original goals. Designation is still as we speak there. I would like this opportunity for OPC to be the plan B, the security blanket that Chumash Heritage has to encourage and expand 30 by 30 goals, to strengthen our tribal stewardship network, to highlight California's unique commitment to tribes, and to be the first to lead the way in case the other options fall short. And not to get into too much of the management plan, but I'm concerned and I would really like to feel comfortable that Ocean Protection Council and the 30 by 30 initiative not only help strengthen Chumash heritage, but also look at all the ways that national marine sanctuaries can be enhanced, management plans can be updated to include tribes, and that we can work to get these marine protected areas and more fully protected. Honestly, I am all for more fully protected marine areas, especially in Chumash heritage. So I would like to say that I support adding Chumash heritage to the 30 by 30, but I do have reservations. There are incompatible uses in Chumash heritage. There are concerns, and I'm hoping that we could work through some of those in the roadmap for the next strategic plan, and appreciate all the work put into this initiative. Like I said, this is my life stream to see this area protected. We've made lots of compromises. We've made compromises with stable pipeline, offshore wind, decommissioning of Diablo Canyon. There's so many compromises that we've made along the way. I don't feel that this is a durable protection. So I'm wondering if OPC in the state of California and your leadership can make us feel more comfortable that Chumash heritage will have better protection in the future. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Violet, and for all your leadership establishing Chumash National Marine Sanctuary. Are there other tribal leaders that are joining virtually that can recognize themselves to be heard at this point?
We do have next speaker, Kenneth Khan, Chair Khan. You have the floor. Thank you. Can you guys hear me okay?
We sure can.
Excellent. Well, first I want to thank Michael. Certainly appreciate the presentation. I mean, tribal stewardship and co-management are extremely important to us. My name is Kenny Khan. I'm the chairman for the San Ynez Band of Chumash Indians. We're certainly glad to be a part of this presentation today, and certainly I want to extend a thank you to Secretary Crowfoot and the members of the council. Thank you for reviewing the Chumash Heritage National Marine Sanctuary for possible inclusion for the 30 by 30 conservation area. I know we submitted a letter back in February. We've been working on this effort as well for the Chumash Heritage National Marine Sanctuary for almost a decade now. And as Violet Sage Walker had pointed out, funding is a concern. It's a concern for us as well. We were just in DC last week, working with many of our partners, and I know in this period of uncertainty, we've kind of looked at some of our neighboring sanctuaries like Channel Islands or Monterey Bay. We certainly appreciate the partnerships that we've had with Channel Islands and also working on a lot of the MPAs as well. Co-management of this Chumash Heritage National Marine Sanctuary, it'll allow the tribe and our tribal partners to protect our historic ocean territories and conserve the many unique species. And so, we just want to echo our thanks and our concerns as well. But certainly much appreciated to the OPC for entrusting the tribe with the Chumash conservation areas as well. So thank you again. Much appreciated.
Thank you, Chairman. Appreciate you coming on today and your leadership establishing the Chumash National Marine Sanctuary. Our team, any other tribal leaders that want to be recognized at this point? This doesn't eliminate their opportunity to be heard later in public comment, but we just wanted to defer to them now. Okay, so the team, I don't think has identified anyone else. Staff was anticipating at least a couple of more tribal leaders or representatives joining us. So I think at this point, what we're going to do is move to other comment. We typically defer at these council meetings to other state agencies to provide public comment first. So let's go ahead and do that. And then we have as much time as we need to hear all public comment, both in the room and online.
Thank you. Good afternoon again, Chair Crowfoot, members of the council and OPC staff. I'm Susan Ashcraft, Marine Advisor for the California Fish and Game Commission, and I'm here today to express appreciation for the release of OPC's roadmap for achieving 30 by 30 in coastal waters. The document clearly represents thoughtful consideration and integration of scientific, public, and agency input. We commend the council for making a clear distinction in the roadmap between the statewide 30 by 30 process and the separate adaptive management process for the state's Marine Protected Areas Network. As part of the process, the California Fish and Game Commission is working hand in hand with the Department of Fish and Wildlife and OPC staff in considering publicly submitted petitions for changes to the MPA network. And while each of our efforts is distinct, both will benefit from adaptively managing and strengthening the MPA network. We support the framework's inclusion of the entire MPA network, which is an interconnected protective system, not just a collection of individual sites with their individual goals and objectives. This perspective aligns with the Commission's approach to adaptively managing the network, firmly founded on science guidelines in the Marine Protected Areas Master Plan and the Marine Life Protection Act itself, as well as new information supported by OPC that has emerged from the decadal management review to support future adaptive goals, including climate resilience. We further support the council promoting a focus on the land-sea interface in the framework. such as the strategically siting and aligning state water quality protection areas and other types of marine managed areas. This approach is a key principle in the Marine Managed Areas Improvement Act and is vital for truly integrated coastal protection. We also note that the roadmap's recognition of tribal stewardship areas and co-management is a goal that aligns with the Fish and Game Commission's priorities, and appreciate OPC's commitment to evaluating how tribal stewardship contributes to collective biodiversity goals. There's much that we have to learn. In closing, I extend our sincere thanks for your vital collaboration and our shared conservation goals. They're essential to the success of those goals. And your staff's active partnership with both Commission and California Department of Fish and Wildlife has been invaluable, and it reflects the partnership-based approach underpinning our shared governance. We look forward to continuing to build on those efforts. So thank you.
Many thanks to all that the Commission's doing. Appreciate it.
Chair, may I interrupt?
Yeah.
We're getting some feedback. For those of you in the room who are speaking at the podium, if you could please get close to the mic. We're getting some feedback that people can't hear. And I do believe we have found the tribal leaders who are participating remotely. Sarah, is that right?
Yeah, we can offer the floor to Sam Cohen. Sam, if you'd like to speak, please unmute yourself.
Thank you very much, Sam Cohen, Chief Legal Counsel, CHNMS Band of Chumash Indians. I've had the privilege of working for the first 10 years on marine protected areas and my second 10 years on Chumash Heritage National Marine Sanctuary. We're pleased we're in the process of appointing a sanctuary advisory committee with our federal partners and OPC, and we thank OPC for all their support. Going forward, the CHNMS Band of Chumash encourages everyone to participate. Even if you weren't on the first Sanctuary Advisory Committee, there'll be reappointments, and each there will be at least 12 work plans for biodiversity and conservation, all of which will need volunteers and technical expertise. So this will be a long-term process that will preserve tribal engagement and our partnership with the state of California and OPC for a long period of time. And we thank you again for your 30 by 30 designation.
Sam, we were following you. We just lost you.
I just wanted to invite everyone to participate in work plans for the Chumash Heritage National Marine Sanctuary. This is going to be a long-term process to protect the area encompassed by the National Marine Sanctuary, and we look forward to robust biodiversity and conservation efforts. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And we caught all of that, Sam, so thank you.
And then our next tribal partner will be Nakia Zavala. Nakia.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much. Haku, everybody. Makduka Niki Zavala, Alapala Hulapu, Nisamala Chumash na CHNMS Band of Chumash Indians. Good afternoon, Ocean Protection Council. Thank you for this time to speak. I am the Tribal Historic Preservation Officer for the CHNMS Band of Chumash Indians and also the Cultural Director for the tribe. And I just want to take this moment to continue to emphasize and really thank you all for the inclusion of tribes in this process and recognizing the importance of our ocean and coastline. I do want to thank you for supporting the designation of the Chumash Heritage National Marine Sanctuary. And, definitely look forward to this work that we'll be doing and really the access to our sacred waters and our coastlines for our people and our children and our elders. So really, thank you so much for all your work and your support. We say Kakinash, we thank you all very much. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I think that's the tribal leaders that are joining virtually. Let's then go back to public comment from state agencies.
Good afternoon. It's because Mike's so tall. That's why we have to pull this down a little bit further. My name is Megan Hurdle. I'm Deputy Secretary for Biodiversity and Habitat with California Natural Resources Agency. I lead California's 30 by 30 with a focus on the land side. And I'm here today to emphasize some of the points that Mike made, and one of them being that California's 30 by 30 went through an extensive public process in 2021 and 2022. And it set a really high bar definition for what counts for 30 by 30 and a very robust strategy that applies not just to the land side, but also to the coastal water side. And what you see reflected in this roadmap is holding up that definition and holding up that strategy, which also includes commitments to climate and to equitable access. In fact, our definition for what counts as 30 by 30, both on the land side and in the coastal water side, is stronger than many of our international partners and stronger than the America the Beautiful commitment, which was the former US commitment to 30 by 30. On the land side, we use two data sources to track what counts for 30 by 30. The California Protected Area Database and the California Conservation Easement Database, which have a data point called a gap code, which represents biodiversity protection. Unfortunately, on the coastal water side, they do not have those same databases. But what is proposed within this roadmap aligns with that gap code analysis. It's worth noting on the land side that gap code 1 and gap code 2 count for 30 by 30. Gap code 1 allows for, it has a biodiversity management plan and it is durably protected. Gap code 2, same two things, but it also allows for human uses that might lightly degrade the natural areas. Basically, it makes space for humans to coexist with biodiversity. And it's something that we track closely and we reassess, which this roadmap allows. The other thing I wanted to point out is we've really found on the land side that there is not a one-size-fits-all designation for 30 by 30, that we need to think about a multifaceted approach for how we reach this target and how we do it while also improving benefits for biodiversity. Great examples are we have national and state parks that benefit biodiversity and recreation. We have wildlife areas and ecological reserves that protect sensitive species and allow for fishing and hunting. We have private conservation easements that also provide working landscapes, but have biodiversity as their top management goal. And we have national monuments, ancestral land return, and co-management that protects cultural resources and biodiversity. We know we will have to look beyond the marine protected areas to reach this target. The roadmap that you have before you to consider today not only adds to the number for 30 by 30, but it also helps us push for more biodiversity protections, to drive more resources into these areas, and ultimately to acknowledge areas that are providing additional biodiversity protections in our coastal waters. So thank you so much for the time and for your consideration of this roadmap.
Thank you.
Well, Osila, and hello everyone, and thank you so much, Chair and the members of the Ocean Protection Council for the opportunity to speak with you all here today. My name is Geneva E.B. Thompson. I'm a citizen of the Cherokee Nation, she, her pronouns. I'm very honored to serve as the Deputy Secretary for Tribal Affairs at the California Natural Resources Agency and working very closely with my colleagues Jen Eckerly as well as Megan Hurdle on the Pathways to 30 by 30. And to echo the presentation that Mike shared with you all here today, the proposed roadmap to achieving 30 by 30 in the California coastal waters is critical in us reaching that goal of 30 by 30 in the coast and ocean, but it's also critical and essential for us to meet and implement the core commitment of the Pathways to 30 by 30 strategy of strengthening partnerships with California Native American tribes. I know it's Mike and the council are fully aware what we now call as California and California coastal waters has a long history, and that history starts with tribal stewardship, tribal care of our coast and of our waters, of the species that rely on healthy coastal waters. And that care has been done since time immemorial. Tribal leadership, tribal ecological knowledge has a deep place-based science that is finely tuned to what our oceans need, what the critters, the fish, the species that rely on clean water need. And these oceans have survived and thrived because of that tribal stewardship, because of that traditional ecological knowledge. And it is through a series of historical wrongs, attempted destruction of tribes and tribal communities, the criminalization of traditional ecological knowledge, that we're seeing our oceans suffer. We're seeing the species that rely on the ocean suffer. And so for us to move forward in that spirit of truth and healing and moving forward in strengthening partnerships with tribes, we need to get back to that place where traditional ecological knowledge, tribal stewardship can thrive. This is an opportunity for the state of California to really provide clear guidance and policy, showing that the state of California is going to be there to support California Native American tribes if and when challenges present themselves, that tribes will be there at the table stewarding our oceans. And this roadmap and these pathways set out by the staff of the Ocean Protection Council is going to be a critical tool in our toolbox to make sure that we are there showing up, partnering with tribes in the critical care of our coast and ocean. And so I'm so thankful and so excited to see the tribal stewardship area, the tribal stewardship pathway laid out in this roadmap. I think that is going to be a critical next step for the state of California to strengthen partnerships with the tribes in the spirit of truth and healing. So Wado, and thank you so much for the opportunity to share, and appreciate y'all's time.
Thank you so much, Geneva. Okay, now we're going to move to public comment in the. Sorry.
Sounds like we have another tribal leader on Zoom who has his hand raised.
Okay, let's do that, and then we'll move to public comment. So you're close, those who are standing up near the podium. All right, let's move to the virtual comment.
Scott, you have the floor.
Wagiasham, good afternoon, Chair Crowfoot and members of the Ocean Protection Council. Shahoshi Scott Sullivan, I'm the Vice Chairman of the Tolowadeni Nation, and I appreciate the opportunity to offer comments today. I'm here to comment on the draft roadmap for identifying 30 by 30 conservation areas in California's coastal waters, and specifically the implications it has for Indigenous Marine Stewardship Areas, or IMSAs. To begin, I want to thank OPC staff and leadership for the inclusion of tribal initiatives in this roadmap, and I look forward to continuing to refine this document to make sure it fits the needs of tribal nations throughout California. The current draft includes new elements of a framework that will ultimately determine whether IMSAs are considered eligible for recognition as durable conservation under the state's 30 by 30 initiative. And this version of the roadmap directly impacts tribal nations by introducing criteria and decision points that will be used to evaluate our stewardship practices. One example is decision tree in the roadmap, which asks, is this site formally and collaboratively managed, stewarded, and cared for by California Native American tribes in ways that achieve significant biodiversity benefits? And it seems clear to me here that the state intends collaboratively to mean in partnership with state agencies, but I just want to emphasize that the Yurok-Tolowadeni Indigenous Marine Stewardship Area is collaboratively managed, stewarded, and cared for by 3 federally recognized tribes. That collaboration is formal, intergovernmental, and rooted in shared responsibility across our traditional territories. Our work is durable, it does achieve significant biodiversity benefits, and it must be recognized as a 30 by 30 conservation area. We do not need the state to examine our governance structures or decide whether our stewardship aligns with a set of criteria that has not been developed in partnership with tribal nations. That approach risks invalidating Indigenous systems of care that we have successfully protected these ecosystems since time immemorial. Given the direct implications of this framework, which are being considered today, and that IMSAs are not categorically included as being eligible for a 30 by 30 recognition, I respectfully urge the Council to pause and re-engage in formal, meaningful government-to-government consultations with tribal nations on the metrics that will be used to determine eligibility of IMSAs under this roadmap. Shushaninla for your time.
Thank you very much, Scott.
Thank you. And sorry to interrupt, but our last state leader is Craig Schumann. Craig, you now have.
Craig, we don't yet hear you.
There you go. Can you hear me now?
We sure can.
Good afternoon, Secretary Crowfoot, members of the council. I'm Craig Schumann, Marine Region Manager with California Department of Fish and Wildlife.
Sit.
We've worked very closely with OPC staff on the development of the roadmap toward achieving 30 by 30 in coastal waters, and I'm pleased to share the department's support for the proposed approach. My thanks to Mike Escrow and his team for the collaboration and coordination throughout the development of the roadmap. I also want to give a huge shout out and thanks to Executive Director Eckerly for her leadership and collaborative approach on this and the numerous other projects they were working on together. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Craig, for all that you have done to collaborate with the team. All right, let's move to public comment in the room. And those who are providing public comment online, we'll be with you in just a little bit. We maybe have about 6 to 8 people here in the room, and then we'll move to virtual comment. Welcome back.
Hi, thank you. Good afternoon again. As I said, my name is Rebecca Schwartz-Lesberg. I'm the president of Coastal Policy Solutions. And over the past year, I've been working with statewide partners and scientific experts to ensure that bays and estuaries are adequately protected as part of OPC's 30 by 30 process in coastal waters. From that perspective, I want to start with and emphasize a huge thank you to OPC staff, specifically Mike and Jen, for hearing our concerns about estuaries and calling them out so specifically in this roadmap. I also want to thank OPC staff and a previous commenter for referencing the need to improve water quality protections as part of adaptively managing our MPA network. From the perspective of bays and estuaries, I'd like to highlight 2 key passages in the roadmap and offer some open-ended questions that could be tackled at a future date, perhaps as part of the upcoming engagements described during the presentation. Number 1 is the call out within the decision tree stating that wetlands and estuaries are often threatened in ways that are not fully addressed by the existing decision tree, and that there's a need for additional assessment of these sites. So I would ask moving forward, how will this assessment of estuary sites lead to policy recommendations from OPC to the legislature and other state agencies? And relatedly, on page 12, the Conserving California Estuaries box, OPC reaffirms its commitment to strengthening biodiversity protections. And so I ask again, as we look to strengthen these protections, what kind of policy recommendations might we expect? Because I really encourage OPC to lean into your statutory authority to identify and recommend to the legislature changes in law that are needed to achieve the goals of the agency. So again, thank you so much for all of these efforts and for the opportunity to provide comments here today.
Big thanks for those thoughtful comments.
Good afternoon, council members. My name is Hudson Prunier with Environment California. I wanted to just reaffirm some points that were made in the written comments submitted to this council from Environment California, along with some other organizations. I respectfully request that the council delay the adoption of the roadmap to achieving 30 by 30 in California's coastal waters and revise the document to address the following concerns. The roadmap lacks clear, detailed standards for what qualifies under the biodiversity management criterion. While it states that lightly protected MPAs in certain non-MPA areas may count as 30 by 30 conservation areas, it does not provide specific guidance on how these areas will be evaluated. Instead, it defers to future case-by-case assessments without outlining the criterion or metrics that would guide those evaluations. Furthermore, the roadmap emphasizes that 30 by 30 conservation areas must offer a high degree of ecological protection. However, it also includes lightly protected MPAs, which allow for some extractive or destructive activities and acknowledges their moderate impact on biodiversity. This appears to be inconsistent with the stated requirement for a high degree of ecological and environment protection. Thank you, council members, for your continued dedication for protecting our oceans.
Thank you, Hudson.
Good afternoon, Council. I'm Bridget Mulcairn. I'm the Senior Climate Policy Manager with Audubon, California, and I'm going to echo a lot of what the previous comment said. As a part of the Power and Nature Coalition, Audubon California is both grateful for and concerned with aspects of the drafted roadmap to achieving 30 by 30 in California coastal waters. Again, my comments align with the submitted written comments, so I'll keep it pretty brief. As currently drafted, the roadmap fails to adequately define what is a conserved area, and there are inconsistencies in the definition in the roadmap. The roadmap also lacks detail for what meets the biodiversity management criteria and prematurely counts some areas as meeting 30 by 30 criteria. Further, in order to improve protecting our coastal and marine ecosystems, the roadmap must expand discussion around access and clearly connect it to equity. Audubon's 2019 climate report found that we are at risk of losing 389 birds in North America. Those are individual species that could be lost due to climate change. And the more recent 2025 State of the Birds report found that seabird populations are down between 55 and 95%. To support birds, we need a stable climate, so we must strengthen the roadmap by addressing the concern mentioned by myself and others in the Power and Nature Coalition. Thank you for the opportunity to comment and also for your important work on this.
Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, I'm Paige Barabee with the Nature Conservancy. As a science-based organization whose mission is to conserve the lands and waters upon which all life depends, we strongly support California's commitment to conserve 30% of its lands and waters by 2030. TNC recognizes the critical role of tribally led management and stewardship in achieving California's 30 by 30 and equitable access goals, and we appreciate the roadmap highlights this. We thank OPC staff for the significant time and effort that went into the development of this roadmap. TNC would like to share 4 recommendations for consideration. First, we recommend OPC publish the list of marine managed areas that have been evaluated or will be evaluated using the criteria in the roadmap, as well as the projected timeline for reviewing this list. Second, we recommend OPC establish clearer and more transparent criteria in the roadmap that will be consistently applied to determine which coastal waters will meet the definition of a conserved area. It isn't clear if all national marine sanctuaries have been evaluated as 30 by 30 conservation areas, and we believe sanctuaries provide important biodiversity and conservation and protection, especially considering the extensive network of sanctuaries along California's coast. As OPC determines areas that count, we encourage consideration and application of transparent criteria when evaluating national marine sanctuary management plans. Third, we appreciate the recognition and importance and uniqueness of estuaries, and we look forward to working with OPC to establish criteria specific to estuarine areas for 30 by 30. Lastly, we recommend OPC create a robust and transparent public process for reviewing the final 30 by 30 determinations that result from applying these transparent criteria. We look forward to continuing to work with OPC as the roadmap is applied and we work towards 30 by 30 goals. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Hello, my name is Keith Ruthsard. I'm with the Giant Kelp Restoration Project. And this roadmap is adding 5.7% of the inventory by declaring that the newly formed Chumash Heritage National Marine Sanctuary is protected, which is still open to nearly all forms of extractive uses in alignment with Monterey Bay, Cordell Bank, Greater Fairlawns, and Channel Islands National Marine Sanctuaries. For the ocean part of the equation, 30 by 30 is a rebranding exercise, and fishing regulations are not going to change. The ocean is broken. It is so out of balance. The urchins don't care about underwater imaginary property lines. We lost 90% of our kelp, and the sea otters have exhausted the invertebrate population and are instead eating the mussels in the intertidal. Conserving 30% of the ocean is going to cost more than conserving 30% of the land. We don't have to breathe compressed air to plant ice plant on a sand dune. Marine ecosystem services will cost money. I'm encouraged by the words in the last paragraph of the roadmap. The time is now. 30 by 30 is about more than simply designating areas as conserved on a map. It is a call to action. Thank you.
Thank you very much for all you're doing. Welcome.
Welcome.
Good to see you.
Good to see you. Hello, Secretary Crowfoot, members of the council. My name is Scott Webb, and I serve as the Director of Advocacy for the Resource Renewal Institute. I'm here to urge the council to postpone finalizing the 30 by 30 roadmap. I'm concerned by the precedent the council is setting by moving forward with the decision to count areas that have active indiscriminate gear types, such as California trawl grounds, towards the state 30 by 30 goals. I fully support the need for working shorelines and strong fishing communities in California, but this isn't about whether we value fisheries, it's about what counts as conservation. We can debate the impact of light touch trawl gear, which each trawl door can weigh up to 500 pounds, over the importance that some of these trawl grounds included in the areas in the Chumash sanctuary have not had tow observations in the state's most recent assessment. But this isn't a fishery management decision. At its core, this is about maintaining the integrity of California's 30 by 30 commitment. Counting areas where any trawling occurs, an activity recognized as minimally protective or incompatible with conservation, undermines the definition of conserved this state has committed to. No matter the size or scope, including halibut trawl grounds is not a credible strategy for achieving 30 by 30. I respectfully ask the council to please reconsider. Thank you so much.
Thank you for being here.
Good afternoon. My name is Tomás Álvarez with Azul. We recognize the hard work and time invested by OPC. However, we do not support the staff recommendation to adopt the roadmap at this meeting today. As written, the final roadmap risks weakening the integrity of the 30 by 30 effort. The proposed roadmap would allow an area with activities that are incompatible with conservation, such as oil and gas production and bottom trawling, to count towards the 30 by 30 goal. It would also backtrack on the state's position that national marine sanctuaries must be strengthened to meet the state's definition of conserved. We instead urge the council to amend the roadmap in the following ways: exclude lightly protected MPAs from consideration, qualify any reference to access in the roadmap as equitable access, require biodiversity protections for national marine sanctuaries to be strengthened before consideration towards the 30 by 30 goal. Thank you.
Thank you very much for all of the in-person public comment. And then I'm told we have about 13 people online providing public comment. So let's turn to the virtual.
Yes, we do have about 15 hands raised right now in the queue. We'll start with Pamela Hetherington, followed by Chris Voss. Pamela, you have the floor.
Thank you kindly. Good afternoon, Secretary Crowfoot, Director Eckerly, and the council members. I am Pam Hetherington from the Environmental Center of San Diego, co-lead of the San Diego's 30 by 30 regional group from the onset. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to OPC's 30 by 30 roadmap. To effectively deliver on the promise of fully and highly protected, we suggest the OPC plan should exclude lightly protected MPAs from consideration, clarify protection level definitions, require biodiversity protections for national marine sanctuaries to be strengthened before consideration towards the 30 by 30 goal, clarify what equitable access means in this document, set measurable area-based targets, link adaptive reviews to upgrading protections, map an actionable upgrade path, build in adaptive review triggered upgrades, integrate stakeholders for balance and real-time safeguards, commit to transparent, regular monitoring and reporting, create a mid-plan assessment that encourages plan recalibration or acceleration based on monitoring and stakeholder input. Compare projected ecosystem gains about potential loss of recreational or commercial fishing zones. We appreciate your attention to our request. We look to your leadership for strong protections and a transparent process. California can continue to lead the way in ocean conservation and the global by 30 efforts with these considerations. Thank you kindly.
Thank you very much.
Next, we have Chris Voss, followed by Caitlin Birch. Christopher, you have the floor.
Good afternoon, Chair Crowfoot and council members. My My name is Chris Foss, and I'm president of the Commercial Fishermen of Santa Barbara. And as you can imagine, well, there's concerns we have about, especially the co-management arrangement. While we acknowledge the historic wrongs of the past that need to be addressed, and that it is a nation-to-nation dynamic, and the Chumash sanctuary is unique in relationship to all the other sanctuaries, the concern we have is that there may be decisions that affect commercial fishers that we won't have an opportunity to contribute to that decision-making process. And so I would encourage, in order to proceed forward in a constructive, collaborative, meaningful way, there's some effort on the part of the OPC to include commercial fishers in the decision-making process in some way or another, not in a, maybe not in a significant way, but just to include our input as we figure out how the Chumash sanctuary is co-managed with tribal interests. It's as you can imagine, a pretty serious concern, given that it appears as though a similar dynamic that exists in the Chumash sanctuary is going to be applied to the other sanctuaries in an effort to meet our 30-30 objective. So thank you for allowing me to comment.
Thank you very much for your comment.
Next, we have Caitlin Birch, followed by Merritt McCray. Caitlin, you have the floor.
Good afternoon. My name is Caitlin Birch, a marine scientist with Oceana. I want to express deep appreciation to the OPC Council and staff for the monumental work that has gone into developing California's 30 by 30 roadmap. This is a globally significant effort, as you all know, and the complexity of this task is enormous, as you also all know. So thank you for your leadership and dedication, and for the prioritization of tribal stewardship and partnerships, equity, and access. I want to raise a specific concern about the inclusion of one of California's designated state trawl grounds in a 30 by 30 conservation area. These trawl grounds were established to constrain the impacts of bottom trawling in state waters to specific areas, and importantly, to limit the trawling footprint elsewhere. In other words, these trawl grounds are areas explicitly set aside for extractive use by high-impact commercial fishing gear. I do note that in these trawl grounds, there are regulations in place to mitigate the extent of bottom trawling impacts, but management measures to minimize the damage of higher impact fishing gear and methods do not equate to areas of biodiversity protection, including an area established for commercial trawling as conserved under 30 by 30 sets a troubling precedent, and I ask the council today to delay final action and exclude the commercial state trawl grounds in its 30 by 30 tally. Again, I'd like to thank the OPC for leading this effort and recognize the near impossible task at hand here. I also just wanted to quickly say I really appreciate the presentation earlier by Stacey Lewis on the impacts of federal cuts to our state and coastal marine programs. Truly commend the OPC for assessing those impacts and working to identify where the state needs to prioritize filling those critical monitoring and science gaps. So thank you very much, and thank you for the opportunity to talk today.
Big thanks for your comments.
Next, we have Merritt McCray, followed by Julia Chung. Merritt, you have the floor.
Hello, and good afternoon, Chair Crowfoot, council members. I'm Merritt McCray for the Sport Fishing Association of California. The SAC membership includes commercial passenger sport fishing vessels coastwide. First, thank you to Jen Eckerly and Michael Esquell and the entire 30 by 30 team for past and future efforts to engage our sector on this important topic. The SAC supports adaptively managing our state's MPA network, enhancing conservation in national marine sanctuaries, supports tribally-led conservation through indigenous marine stewardship areas, and exploring the role of other marine managed areas in California's coastal waters. From a durability and biodiversity standpoint, we look forward to seeing how the fisheries management work product of the Pacific Fisheries Management Council and California Fish and Game Commission will be integrated into this process. The successful management efforts of these two organizations should assist in framework evolution efforts. Thank you for this opportunity to be heard.
Thank you very much.
Next, we have Julia Chun, followed by Neil Nathan. Julia, you have the floor.
Good afternoon. I'm Julia Chen here with the California Coastal Protection Network, a unique advocacy organization dedicated to protecting California's greatest natural asset, our magnificent 1,100-mile coastline for all generations. We support the comments by NRDC and our written joint comments. CCPN is committed to the success of California's 30 by 30 initiative to combat the many threats facing our ocean ecosystems and to protecting our precious biodiversity. There are several issues in the roadmap that must be rectified prior to approval. We are recommending a no vote unless amended. We implore you to stick with the CNRA official position that National Marine Sanctuary protection should be strengthened to meet the state's definition of conserved prior to sanctuaries counting towards conservation goals. 30 by 30 areas cannot allow trawling or the operation of oil and gas infrastructure. This must be corrected. At this very moment, the federal administration is currently accepting comments on whether oil and gas leasing should occur in sanctuaries, and I'll speak to that later. We also have concerns about areas categorized as lightly protected, counting as conserved, and the precedent that would set. You are the leaders, and we need to maintain a high bar of protection in order for this to be effective. Please don't inadvertently lower the global standard for 30 by 30 conservation areas today. And lastly, it should be clarified that the priority of carbon dioxide removal and storage only applies to natural coastal and blue carbon ecosystems. Thank you for your time and consideration.
Thank you.
Next is Neil Nathan, followed by Anupa Asokan. Neil, you have the floor.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak, Secretary Crowfoot and members of the council, and thanks to OPC for all of your thoughtful work dedicated to conserving our coastlines and our marine resources. My name is Neil Nathan, and I'm a marine scientist at the Benioff Ocean Science Laboratory. We're based at UC Santa Barbara, and we're an applied ocean solutions lab working on a variety of ocean health threats, which includes the topic of marine protected areas, both within the California network and beyond. I'd like to echo the same concerns many others have voiced today over the proposed roadmap for the 30 by 30 framework, particularly over the broadening of the conservation targets to now include these lightly protected areas. Particularly such as national marine sanctuaries. You know, these are obviously really important and valuable areas, but they are distinctly different from MPAs, from our state marine reserves, our state marine conservation areas, our no-take zones, and they deliver very different ecological and biodiversity benefits. I want to highlight some very recent research from not only 2 months ago by Horta Acosta et al. 2025 that actually looks and does a comprehensive analysis of more than 100 different MPAs. And what they found is that highly protected and fully protected areas do deliver significant benefits. They deliver higher fish biomass and higher fish density within the area compared to outside, but lightly protected areas, on the other hand, actually do not deliver these benefits, and in some cases can have negative consequences. Sometimes they found lower fish biomass, lower density within these. So I would also echo the request to pause on the approval of this, and particularly to only include these highly protected and fully protected areas at risk of degrading what that actual goal of California is, to protect 30% of our oceans. We really need to do this right if we're going to do it. And I really, again, gratitude to OPC and all of you for the hard work thus far. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Next speaker is Anupa, followed by Josefina Barantes. Anupa, you have the floor.
Hi, thank you. This is Anupa Asokan with Fish On. I realize there are a lot of competing views to pull together here and really appreciate Mike and OPC staff efforts to try and do so. Taking a step back, we have the 30 by 30 goal because industrial activity, overfishing, and climate change are threatening the future of our ocean, life within it, and the ability for communities to safely and equitably access natural spaces. OPC has an opportunity to show strong leadership for other state and federal decision-making bodies who have not yet broadened their views on who is a stakeholder and who should have a seat at the table for resource management. Many of us who try and speak up in defense of our shared coastal resources and equitable access to them are still harassed and ostracized, not to mention the discrimination many communities face while visiting coastal spaces.
We are relying on OPC to set the tone and a standard of what a healthy ocean should look like and who is heard as we work through these legacy systems that continue to marginalize people. As written, the roadmap does not set a clear tone and leaves too much room for interpretation. It really must center equity and it must define conservation standards clearly and consistently. Oil and gas activity and bottom trawling are not compatible with conservation, and counting them as such undermines equitable ocean access. I'm less concerned with reaching a 30% goal than I am setting a standard where conservation can be done meaningfully and with lasting impact, where all communities can participate safely, and where there is a mechanism to protect species and habitats that are otherwise unmanaged. We're requesting that OPC update the roadmap before adoption with emphasis on equity and with strong and clear standards for conservation and a commitment to tribal authorities. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anupa.
Next speaker is Josefina Barantes, followed by Kaspar Kazazin. Josefina, you have the floor.
Hello, council members and Honorable Wade Crowfoot. My name is Josefina Barantes, and I'm an environmental advocate with the Environmental Protection Information Center, also known as EPIC, located on the North Coast. While EPIC appreciates the hard work and time invested by OPC, we do not support the staff recommendation to adopt the 30 by 30 roadmap at this meeting today. EPIC urges the council to postpone finalization and amend the roadmap in the following ways. Exclude lightly protected MPAs from consideration, require biodiversity protections for national marine sanctuaries to be strengthened before consideration toward the 30 by 30 goal, and describe an evaluation process to guide decisions for non-MPA areas. Additionally, since there is halibut bottom trawling allowed within a portion of the Chumash Heritage National Marine Sanctuary, we do not think that it should be counted as conserved under California's strong definition of what is conserved under 30 by 30. California currently has the strongest definition of 30 by 30 in the nation. Approving this roadmap would weaken our definition and make it less effective for recovering biodiversity loss and the significant impacts that our ocean is experiencing due to climate change. Thank you for your time and consideration.
Thank you.
Next speaker is Kaspar Kazazin, followed by Zoe Collins. Kaspar, you have the floor.
Thank you. This is Casper Kazazian with California Surf Fishing. I'm going to echo some of the things that I've heard before me. First, I want to say, as California Surf Fishing, we've noticed that shore fishermen are traditionally an overlooked community in fishery management. We definitely appreciate the opportunity to comment on the roadmap to 30 by 30. Many adult shore fishermen go to the beach to find some peace or center themselves after a long week at work. Catch and release is often practiced by shore fishermen, especially with California halibut, which is the primary target for shore fishermen. We believe halibut populations need to remain healthy so that regular shore fishermen can continue to enjoy fishing. As such, counting areas as part of the 30 by 30 where halibut trawling is occurring as conserved, that doesn't quite make sense to us. We're relying on OPC to make sure we're actually protecting areas along the coast so that casual anglers, like shore fishermen, recreational shore fishermen, and people who like to enjoy the ocean can still have access to healthy areas with fish and marine life. Please consider the person who has worked a hard 50-hour work week, someone who's looking forward to going to the beach after the hard work week. Except this time, instead of putting a smile on his face with one or two halibut caught from shore, he goes home with no fish at all. I mean, that's maybe a bit of an extreme, but we don't want to go in that direction, right? We do not want to take this opportunity away from all the regular anglers out there. Please consider removing halibut trawling in the areas that are counted towards 30 by 30. Thank you so much.
Next speaker is Zoe Collins, followed by Matisa. Zoe, you have the floor.
Good afternoon, council members, and thank you very much for the opportunity to comment again. My name is Zoe Collins, and I'm here on behalf of Heal the Bay. I'll begin by sharing our immense gratitude for all of the time and work put into making this roadmap and for allowing public input. And we're very excited to see all of the thoughtful progress being made to reach the 30 by 30 goal, but we do have some concerns about the proposed roadmap that we would like to share. First of all, in the spirit of keeping the biodiversity standards for conserved areas high, we maintain that lightly protected areas should not qualify as 30 by 30 conservation areas, regardless of case-by-case analysis. We also believe that national marine sanctuaries could benefit from strengthened protections, as a few commenters before me have mentioned, which in the Chumash Heritage National Marine Sanctuary might include restricting commercial trawling, putting an end to subsea oil transportation, and dedicating funding to ensuring that this area is durably protected despite federal funding cuts. Tribal co-management and indigenous knowledge are key and intersectional with biodiversity standards, and we strongly support their integration into the roadmap. 30 by 30 represents a unique opportunity to strengthen the protections of these areas, give tribes more power and sovereignty, and truly protect the ecosystems and species that 30 by 30 is designed to conserve. And finally, to echo the sentiments of Bishon and a few other organizations, we believe that the roadmap should set a standard for equitable outdoor access and recreation. We were alarmed to not see equity mentioned in the roadmap document. Thank you again very much for your time.
Thank you.
Next speaker is Matisa Jangiri, followed by Lisa Damrosch. Matisa, you have the floor.
Good afternoon, Council, and thank you for the opportunity to comment today. My name is Batisa Jahangiri. I'm a campaign strategist on 30 by 30 with Sierra Club, California, representing 13 chapters in California and 500,000 members and supporters across the state. While we commend the effort of the Council to conserve our critical coastal ecosystems, we do have some concerns with the roadmap as it stands today. We'd like to urge the Ocean Protection Council to vote no unless amended and postpone final adoption of the 30 by 30 roadmap until candidate areas are transparently evaluated and shown to meet the state's definition of conserved. As written, the roadmap risks eroding the protection potential of 30 by 30 and public trust in the process of doing so. So Sierra Club, California believes the roadmap should be amended to require stronger biodiversity protections in national marine sanctuaries before they count towards 30 by 30 and avoid rescinding the state's initial position that national marine sanctuaries must be strengthened in order to count towards 30 by 30. And then also to exclude lightly protected areas that fail to deliver real conservation benefits and postpone counting any areas before the final framework is finalized. We're concerned that including areas that allow harmful activities like trawling and oil and gas production undermines 30 by 30 biodiversity protections and equity. This initiative must deliver meaningful, lasting protection, especially as we face escalating impacts of climate change. With the development of this roadmap, we have the opportunity to ensure that all communities benefit from healthy ocean ecosystems that are as fully protected as possible, and we'd love to see that come to fruition as intended under the 30 by 30 goal. Thanks for your leadership and consideration today.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is Lisa Damrosch, followed by Morgan Tade. Lisa, you have the floor.
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Sure can.
Okay, great, thanks. Good afternoon. Thank you all for the opportunity to provide comment today. My name is Lisa Damrosch. I'm the Executive Director of the Pacific Coast Federation of Fishermen's Associations, PCFFA, and we represent commercial fishing families and port communities along the California coast, people whose lives and livelihoods depend on healthy oceans, and who have worked for generations to provide food and support our communities. We appreciate all the great work that has gone into this roadmap, and we see this as great progress. At the same time, we think it's important to point out that commercial fishermen are among the ocean's most experienced and invested ocean stewards, and that California's commercial fisheries are already among the most highly regulated and restricted in the world. For decades, we have faced season closures, area restrictions, gear mandates, and a constant flow of changing rules. The cumulative pressures have put fishing businesses at risk and created hardship for the coastal communities that rely on us. Ironically, the result of declining local harvest is reduced access to healthy local seafood for the people of California and greater dependence on imports from places with weaker environmental and labor standards, which runs counter to California's broader conservation goals and undermines efforts to address climate change, food security, and equity. So we support the roadmap moving forward. We do note that it would be helpful to clearly describe how existing areas are being reviewed and what standards are being applied. We also recommend that OPC publish the list of areas currently under review and provide a timeline for further public input, and continue to provide those opportunities that would help stakeholders understand what to expect and ensure the decisions are transparent and informed by the people most affected. We believe the state can achieve its 30 by 30 goals without placing any new restrictions on any of our commercial fisheries, and we look forward to continuing to engage in the process. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much.
Next speaker is Morgan Tate, followed by Eva Pagaling. Morgan, you have the floor.
Good afternoon, Secretary Crowfoot and council members. My name is Morgan Toddy, and I'm a legal and policy intern with the Environmental Action Committee of West Marin. Our mission is to protect and sustain the unique lands, waters, and biodiversity of West Marin, and I'm here today representing approximately 1,200 members of our Point Reyes Station-based organization. We're part of a coalition committed to advancing California's 30 by 30 initiative to protect our oceans and biodiversity. And while we recognize and applaud the hard work OPC staff have put into the roadmap, we join our partners in the belief that adopting the roadmap as currently proposed would severely compromise the success of the state's goal. First, including lightly protected areas as 30 by 30 conservation areas would not resolve the issue of inconsistent enforcement in conservation, and instead we hope you will only include fully protected and highly protected MPAs for consideration, given their ecological benefits are more strongly supported by scientific evidence. We also recommend that OPC postpone its evaluations of sites outside of the MPA network until the roadmap has been finalized and clear evaluation procedures have been established for calculating a site's biodiversity benefits. And finally, designating national marine sanctuaries as 30 by 30 areas would be premature without first requiring strengthened protections. We believe that including sites that still allow for industrial-scale commercial fishing practices like trawling would greatly undermine the purpose of the 30 by 30 initiative. We thank you for your collaboration and investment in the initiative and hope you will consider our proposed amendments to the roadmap. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next speaker is Eva, followed by Sandy Ellsworth. Eva, you have the floor.
Hakuila, hello everyone, hello council members and Secretary Wade Crowfoot. Maxukal Eva Pagaling, my name is Eva Pagaling, ni Samalo Chumash Ino, and I come from the Samala Band of Chumash Indians, also known as Santina's Band of Chumash Indians. I come here today representing myself as one of the co-founders and president of nonprofit Ocean Origins. We are a local profit operating out of my territory, and our primary goal is to facilitate internal capacity building and empower our local indigenous communities and other communities throughout California to strengthen their role in coastal marine stewardship. Our organization is dedicated to fostering collaborative partnerships between indigenous communities, marine scientists, and academics. And we believe that by bridging that gap between the scientific expertise and traditional ecological knowledge, we can create a sustainable future for our marine ecosystems. Our organization supports the OPC 30 by 30 roadmap priorities for tribally led marine stewardship and marine conservation areas throughout the Chumash territory and within Chumash Heritage National Marine Sanctuary. I also serve as the tribal liaison for the Reef Check Dive into Science program for Chumash Youth Access. And we have a really, really enthusiastic and skilled group of Chumash and Tongva youth and young adults who are going through the scientific dive program right now. And it's been a privilege to be able to help be a part of contributing to their skills and also being able to set up a nonprofit that can help with Chumash marine stewardship. And we're really excited, again, to work within the Chumash Heritage National Marine Sanctuary and to have Chumash, marine scientific divers out in the water to help support the work that OPC has been supporting for many years now. And we just wanted to express our sincere gratitude and hope that we can work together in the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
The next speaker is Sandy Ellsworth, followed by the final speaker, Sable O. Sandy, you have the floor.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Chair Crowfoot and council members. My name is Sandy Aylesworth, and I'm with NRDC's Oceans program. We very much appreciate OPC's work on the 30 by 30 roadmap and the extensive outreach that staff have conducted. However, we are concerned that the roadmap as written would not realize the 3 goals of the 30 by 30 initiative. It's for this reason that NRDC is respectfully urging a no vote on the staff recommendation today. We are supportive of the 3 conservation pathways, particularly the tribally led conservation pathway. Yet the roadmap sets differing standards for conservation for the 3 pathways, despite their shared objectives. The standards it sets are either ambiguous or below that which are shown to be in the scientific literature as necessary to yield measurable benefits to biodiversity. For the MPA pathway, the roadmap implies that lightly protected areas may qualify, despite the strong scientific record showing that fully and highly protected areas most effectively sustain ecosystem function and biodiversity. It is unclear how individual assessments will be made when determining whether a lightly protected area counts. The roadmap is inconsistent with the state's prior position that sanctuaries would need to be strengthened to count as conserved. Scientific assessments have determined California's sanctuaries are minimally protected or incompatible with conservation when examined against the MPA guide framework. That's because they allow large-scale industrial extractive activities. For instance, halibut trawling currently occurs in state waters in regions of the Chumash Heritage National Marine Sanctuary, and the Sable pipeline may be actively transporting oil through the sanctuary. We are concerned that the state is setting a lower biodiversity conservation standard for tribal areas and non-MPA areas. If given the opportunity, we are very eager to continue working with OPC to create a final 30 by 30 roadmap that will advance California's role as a leader in ocean conservation. Thank you.
Thank you, Sandy.
Our next and final speaker is Sable. Sable, you have the floor.
Hi, thank you for the opportunity to comment. Can you hear me all right?
We can.
Hi, I'm the Advocacy Co-Director of the North Coast Environmental Center up in Northern California, and I'm here to express our concerns about the roadmap as it is in its current state. I want to say that we recognize and appreciate the hard work and time that's been invested by the OPC. However, we do not support the staff recommendation to adopt the roadmap at this meeting today. We urge the council to postpone finalization and amend the roadmap in many of the ways that you've already heard in public comment and written comments, including to exclude lightly protected MPAs from consideration, to qualify any reference to access in the roadmap as equitable access, to require biodiversity protections for national marine sanctuaries to be strengthened before consideration toward 30 by 30 goal, and to describe an evaluation process to guide decisions for non-MPA areas. The California 30 by 30 initiative must provide real lasting protection for our ocean ecosystems, especially in the face of climate change. What matters most is meaningful protection for our ocean, not just hitting a number. In addition, the 30 by 30 must be done in a way that advances reparation and mitigation of past harm and prioritizes the needs of those marginalized in past decision-making. As one of the oldest environmental orgs advocating behind the Redwood Curtain, the NEC represents community members across Northern California and Southern Oregon. The NEC, along with numerous other environmental orgs, have expressed many of these concerns in previous comments and discussions during the drafting process of the roadmap. If the OPC decides to adopt the roadmap in its current state, we believe that this will undermine the public and stakeholder participation process and not hold true to the stated intentions of protecting and restoring California's biodiversity. 11 days is not enough time for an adequate comment period on the final draft of the roadmap, and the roadmap has yet to incorporate the previously submitted comments into its framework. We appreciate your consideration of our request, and thank you for your hard work.
Thank you very much for that comment. So I believe that ends public comment, and I want to first of all thank everybody for their patience, staying on until deep in the meeting and providing those comments. Also, just thank you for the acknowledgement of the hard work of the OPC staff and just the respectful articulation of your position. Whether you're tribal leaders, fishing sector leaders, environmental leaders, I think we all share the same North Star, and that is a healthy and sustainable ocean. I might start with some high-level comments, and I imagine there may be questions from our council members and a fair amount to unpack here. I guess as somebody who has spent the better part of 5 years working to advance 30 by 30, I'm actually encouraged by this conversation. I think it really speaks to how seriously we're all taking 30 by 30 as a catalyst for improved conservation. When 30 by 30 was set as a target and as an executive order, we and I worried a little bit that some would consider it irrelevant or a target that didn't mean anything, or it wouldn't be a catalyst. And I think I see by the time and attention that all these different leaders invested in figuring into this roadmap, I think that 30 by 30 has really demonstrated that it is a catalyst moving forward. So I think that's definitely a good thing. I'll share my point of view that our state marine protected area network is the foundation of 30 by 30 in our coastal waters. And I think from an environmental standpoint, we can be proud of these 124 networked areas. And it was validated by this inclusion in the Global Green List. And I think we'll continue to support its adaptation, recognizing that the Fish and Games process is truly a separate process than 30 by 30, but we support it continuing to adapt. I want to also acknowledge, though, that a lot of people that work in the ocean, that use the ocean, that care about the ocean, have concerns about the existing MPA network. And those voices of some leaders in the fishing community are frequent and intense at the Fish and Game Commission. And so one thing I'm excited about, and I think we owe it to everybody, is to broaden our pathways beyond just our MPA network. And I liken this to our work on the land for 30 by 30. Yes, we have national parks. Yes, we have wilderness areas that are protected. Yes, we have state parks. But we've also built a big tent on the land side that includes a range of conservation measures, including conservation easements on cattle ranches, including areas that have active hunting and fishing. Now, I think if everybody were left to their own devices, they might choose one or two types of 30 by 30 conservation that they might exclude on the land side, but I think our power has been building a big tent, and I think we're stronger for it. We maintain the foundation of our conservation, like the parks, like the wilderness areas, and we build on that conservation. And I think that was really the intent here. And so I'll state my clear perspective that we do need more pathways to coastal water conservation than just the MPA network, our state MPA network. I do think we have held ourselves to high account for ensuring that those are truly protected areas. We are not in a race to check the box to 30%. If we were, we would have counted all national marine sanctuaries and called it a day. I do think there are two pathways we need to build out. One is this tribal leadership pathway. I think few would disagree with that. I think we recognize the importance of that, and we're committed to that. And then the other are these other designations, whether they're University of California reserves, national wildlife refuges, national estuarine research reserves, to be assessed in a transparent way if they actually meet the standard to protect biodiversity. And I think we'd be selling these different institutions short, and we'd be selling ourselves short if we didn't actually consider bringing those other designations onto the 30 by 30 in the coast. I want to speak to the tribal pathway because I hear a range of perspectives today from tribal leaders. On the one hand, we have tribal leaders that I'll acknowledge have said that these indigenous marine stewardship areas are led and defined and shaped by tribal leaders, and it's really not up to the state to determine what's considered conservation or not. And I want to acknowledge that perspective, but I also want to recognize that this 30 by 30 is our own designation. So we're not suggesting that a indigenous marine stewardship area necessarily has to be governed by that, but to count for 30 by 30, we have set this bar of a set of durable biodiversity perspectives. On the land side, we're really involved in land back, and we're funding ancestral land return. But within the context of 30 by 30, for it to count for 30 by 30, it needs to, that ancestral land return also needs to have conservation protections. And so I very much think that that's important on the marine side. At the same time, I recognize that some are concerned, well, many are concerned that we heard from today about the designation of Chumash National Marine Sanctuary as 30 by 30. And I think it's worth unpacking this a little bit. What I hear our staff saying that's different about the Chumash National Marine Sanctuary is one, a explicit focus on biodiversity, and then what's being termed as an explicit and binding framework for collaborative co-stewardship with local Chumash tribes. And I think we heard from Mr. Cohen today that that is a work in progress. There are 12 different plans, the different aspects of environmental stewardship that are being built out, and this is a step forward. It's not something that's sort of mission accomplished, but it's making progress. I think from our perspective, we believe that actually the designation of Chumash within 30 by 30 builds the accountability that we have in the state to ensure it actually meets that standard of protection, meets that vision of Indigenous-led protection. So from my perspective, if we include Chumash in the 30 by 30, we actually build the state's investment in supporting tribes, building that out to a meaningfully protected area. And I'll say that if, you know, as we've always said on the land side, if there is land or water that has protections, that loses protections, the designation can go in the other way, and it can actually be removed from 30 by 30. Of course, we're somewhat concerned about that on the land side with national monument threats. So I'll say from our perspective, tribal pathways are critical. We think now is the time to lean forward on establishing this tribal pathway as a legitimate pathway into 30 by 30. And I think we need to hold ourselves accountable if Chumash National Marine Sanctuary is there to actually achieve those biodiversity protections and manifest those. And if we don't collectively meet that together with tribal leadership, then I would be supportive of removing it. And then I'll just say on the other designations, I've heard that there's a real desire to understand what other designations, for example, UC reserves, which were referenced, or national wildlife refuges, what are being considered by OPC, what are the criteria that are being assessed, and then how and when are those being assessed. So I think we need to build transparency there. Again, I strongly support being able to do that, but I think we need to be more transparent. And then maybe lastly on ensuring that when we talk about access, we're talking about equitable access. I would very much support strengthening this document to speak to the priority, well, access for all, and the priority to build access for those that have been denied that access in the past. That's very much a value that we built and we maintained in 30 by 30, and if we need to give that more clear recognition in the 30 by 30 roadmap, I would very much support that. So those are my initial thoughts. Thanks, council members, for the patience in letting me lay out my thoughts. Somebody who's worked on 30 by 30 a whole heck of a lot in the last several years. Let me turn it to you all for questions, comments, observations, and Megan, we see you on the screen too, so feel free to raise your hand if you want to be recognized. Dr. Jackson.
I was similarly going to ask for patience in walking through my remarks, but you've hit on some of the points I was going to make. And so I'll try and be briefer on those and go in more depth on others. So I think as we come to 30 by 30, I just want us to revisit, as this global movement first came about, yes, it was led by scientific research and advocacy and awareness on decline of ecosystems, but the choice of 30% was still a political target. And so I think we have to remind ourselves as California, and we're positioning ourselves as a global leader, to really focus, yes, on the number, but really on the quality of protection, whether we exceed or fall short of that goal, that we're content with the way in which we've approached conservation. So I wanted to start with that framing. And then in reviewing the documents and looking at the staff rec, and then in hearing a lot from the public today, I think transparency comes to mind. So echoing some of the points that you were making around, like, I think that we could be better about laying out why the decisions were made to include the MPA network, the Marine Reserves, and notably the Chumash National Marine Sanctuary, which has caused a lot of contention, I think, in its inclusion in today's conversations, especially also given concerns about durable protections in general with the National Marine Sanctuaries. I think we can also be more transparent about those criteria that will be used for evaluation and the timeline. So I think from a public perspective, whether there's agreement or not, transparency at least brings awareness and understanding on why decisions are being made. So I think that's a bar we should maintain. And all that being said, I still think that we have this really tremendous opportunity to be better and more inclusive in conservation. And this is a learning edge and like a growth edge, I think, for the state, but I think it's a direction that we have to continue to move towards. And so I think in doing that, we can also make sure that we are being adaptive at our decision making and that we still bring in robust metrics. So in seeing that designation with Chumash being included in the recommendation, can we come back as we have more information and data similar to the ways that we are evaluating the other sanctuaries and make a decision about whether or not we keep it as part of 30 by 30 goals or whether we remove it. But I think the sentiment of moving forward with a tribally co-managed designation is an important pathway that I'd be supportive of.
Thank you very much. And I think the idea of really holding ourselves accountable to data in terms of assessing really all designated areas moving forward is quite helpful. The decadal management review for the MPA is a good example of really that level of assessment. Senator Allen.
Yeah, well, thank you, everyone who participated, and a big thanks to the staff, of course, for helping to put this together. And I got to say, I was impressed by the thoughtfulness of so many of the folks who commented, including people who were from the tribal organizations who recognized some of the challenges they face, including headwinds from the federal government, and others. I guess my broader question here, you're absolutely right, Secretary Crowfoot, when you say that this isn't a conversation about how the folks there have decided to manage their waters. The question is, should this be considered part of our 30 by 30 designation, which is, as has just been mentioned, is a really important stamp of approval for conservation methods that will really set a standard, not just for our state, but as with so many of our environmental policies, they'll be watched very closely around the world and help to really lay down a framework for the way that 30 by 30 is applied in many other places, particularly for offshore conservation. I guess that then begs the question, if we do this as currently conceived, are we tacitly agreeing to similar designation of 30 by 30 gold star to areas where there's, oil and gas extraction, bottom trawling, et cetera? I understand there's a story behind, these activities in these waters. And I guess my question here is, one of the 30s is 2030, right? We've actually got time to get this right. I think it's absolutely appropriate for us to be looking for this particular marine sanctuary to be a critical part of our 30 by 30 goals. I guess the question is, can we develop some a somewhat, can we flesh out these issues and have a somewhat stronger framework in place before taking proactive action with regards to this designation? But state today, our full intention of making this a flagship piece of our 30 by 30 strategy. So I just want to throw that back to you or to others, maybe the staff, and just get some understanding. we've got there's some great stuff in there on cultural heritage protection, the potential for co-management. I love that. I got a chance to go through it, but I think that the challenge is that the biodiversity section appears perhaps a little aspirational, and there's no additional conservation measures that are sought in place. So isn't there a way for us to shore up those areas, no pun intended, in a way that can make everyone feel a little more comfortable? And we got, you heard so many of our friends from the environmental justice movements and these letters. Is there a way for us to strengthen those standards, climate resiliency, especially in the wake of kelp forest collapse and sea star wasting disease, but before we take this important action?
Yeah, I appreciate that observation and the question, and I guess I would just share a couple thoughts. One is, I think we need to be candid that there will be some ongoing difference of opinion around the breadth of pathways to achieve 30 by 30. Certainly on the land side there is. In other words, I've heard over months and years that certain leaders say it should be all about our state's MPA network. And that really is the pathway. And if you want to build up 30%, get the 30 by 30% to the, of the state MPA network. And I think that misses opportunities in areas, for example, like UC reserves or national like wildlife refuges. I also think it misses the opportunity for the tribal pathway. So I'm not sure if we get to a point where the Chumash National Marine Sanctuary has these 12 action plans and this biodiversity framework that are being implemented, that there are still, reasonable leaders that continue to oppose it because it includes activities that they wouldn't include. So I think maybe at this point, I'd want to at least just ask a question of our staff about oil and gas and trawling, because both of those got mentioned. It's my understanding that national marine sanctuaries prohibit new oil and gas, and the existing question on oil and gas is this attempted restart of the Sable pipeline. But I do think we should be clear that national marine sanctuaries writ large, I think eliminate the possibility of new oil and gas leases, which is meaningful because the new administration is considering expansion. My understanding on the trawling, and this is one that I'll ask for clarification from our team because this was of concern to me, is that the trawling within the Chumash National Marine Sanctuary is limited to certain areas, and that it is at least it is expected to be monitored for its biological impacts and adaptively managed from that. So I think I want to make sure that people don't walk away from this saying that we're considering adopting a national marine sanctuary, Chumash National Marine Sanctuary, that allows for oil and gas expansion or significant industrial trawling. But I want to just ask for at least clarification on that because I want to get it right, given how often that was referenced in public comment.
Thank you, Chair. And I'm happy to answer this, but we do have our expert from the Fish and Game Commission, if that might be more helpful. Okay. Well, I'll start, and then if I miss anything important. So the existing open California halibut trawl grounds cover about 20% of the Chumash National Marine Sanctuary boundaries within state waters. It is my understanding that the active trawl fishermen in this area, there are 6 of them. They are legislatively mandated to use light touch trawl gear, and they are legislatively required every 3 years to evaluate this fishery against 4 performance criteria that are ecologically based. So looking at bycatch, ecosystem impacts to the seafloor. The last evaluation was conducted last year, and I will candidly acknowledge that the previous evaluation was done in 2008. But the most recent evaluation did not indicate any impacts to ecosystems or biodiversity. So I think it is very important to acknowledge that in other parts of the world, industrial trawling is having significant and terrible impacts on the coast and ocean ecosystems. And I also think, and that is why when you look at the MPA guide and the international guidance there, that activity puts you into minimally protected. I also think that into a minimally protected category. I also think that we've been really focused on grounding ourselves in this international science as our foundation and also aligning it with what's actually happening on the ground in California. And we're trying to do that in a way that maintains the high bar for conservation, which is personally and professionally incredibly important to me, while also acknowledging the need for a breadth of approaches, as Secretary Crowfoot mentioned, to achieve our 30 by 30 goal in a way that supports communities and ecosystem health.
So I think that's helpful information, because that's definitely information that I asked when I was getting input about or concern about those two activities. You know, Senator, I take your question around, well, you know, could we hold off, wait a couple of years, see where, and I'm not suggesting whether it's a couple of years or less time. Sorry.
Well, not just see, but maybe take some proactive steps. I mean, you know, for example, I mean, this system that's there is, we have control over some of this, right? There's, you know, I think the Fish and Game Commission, for example, you know, could make some regulatory changes that would impact, you know, the biodiversity protections in the portions of the national marine sanctuaries. You know, the halibut trawling grounds, you know, we could maybe look at some sort of legislation to modify, you know, in a reasonable way. You know, I don't know. I mean, we all, on our various, you know, hats, right, in the legislature, administration, agencies, can take some steps to, you know, perhaps not totally revamp all the activity that's happening there, but take some meaningful steps to ensure that this is a really meaningful designation, and that we're not, you know, we're keeping it strong, not only for ourselves, but for the rest of the world. And I guess that's the thinking here. What can we do, given all of these concerns, to modify?
I mean, I'll say that amidst, you know, some of the world's strongest environmental policymaking and strongest regulations in California, 30 by 30 was not ever meant to be a driver for regulation. It sits with regulation. So on the land side, for example, there are a lot of entities that said 30 by 30 is going to be the camel's nose under the tent, and you're going to try to regulate our sector, the agriculture sector, for example, because you're going to apply 30 by 30 and then do this. And we say, no, this is actually a set of pathways that are about collaboration and expanding conservation. There will be regulation, but it's not going to happen in the context of 30 by 30. And that's actually worked well on the land side. We've expanded, I think, upwards of 2 million acres of conserved land, and that's not to take away from regulation that's happening outside of that. I feel like on this, I don't want to get too wrapped around the axle and spend, you know, an excessive amount of time in defining what's. I mean, I think it's important to define meaningful conservation, but it's really meant to be a catalyst. So from my perspective, the MPA network is being adapted. That's happening through the Fish and Game Commission. And now this is an opportunity to instruct OPC to go out there and to build other pathways for conservation. Go out there and kick the tires on the UC reserves, which they have. Those are meaningful. Go out there and work with the Greater Farallones National Marine Sanctuary to get actually biodiversity within its management plan to be 30 by 30. Lean in on the Chumash National Marine Sanctuary to actually, you know, manifest what its commitment is. So, I mean, that's why I'm passionate about trying to get this roadmap completed so we can run down the field on each of these with the full recognition that if we come back in a year and the data suggests that actually we hold ourselves accountable for collecting data, and data suggests that we're moving in the wrong direction, I don't want to count something that's not meaningful. But again, 30 by 30 as a catalyst, as a galvanizer, versus, you know, a quasi-regulatory proceeding.
But don't you think we should have some kind of science-driven determinations on protection that just apply? Yeah.
Yeah, and I think if you look at the land side, what we've identified is durably protected principally for environmental benefit. And that means different things to a conservation easement on an active ranch to a federally managed wilderness area. And so, again, I worry about creating, spending months or years identifying, a set of numeric criteria that aren't applied or can be applied, that aren't applicable across the 1,100 miles of coastline in California. Again, I think what we're trying to do is, are we setting a meaningful bar, and are we holding ourselves accountable? I'm open to be, from my perspective, I'm open to letting data drive that, but I think we have done what on the coastal side with this recommendation, what we've done successfully on the land side, which is open up other pathways and then hold ourselves accountable for actually ensuring that those have conservation benefit. Dr. Jackson.
I do think in that there is still a need to have an understanding as we look to the national marine sanctuaries and other case-by-case studies, whether it's a list of criteria or metrics or a clear, consistent framework of questions that we run through. We need to make sure that there's consistency in evaluation. So I would want to see something and make sure that there's a commitment to do that, and whatever we kind of adopt today to make sure that we are taking a data-driven approach, and that I think that will quell some of the anxieties around how are decisions being made for these areas, and also where is there flexibility to pivot if and when it's headed in the wrong direction, to your point.
Yeah, I completely agree with you, and certainly from where I sit would commit to that. So if we adopted this or some amended version of this today, we would come back in next quarter with very specific, to your point, those questions, the specific criteria, as well as to the points around what's being assessed and what's the timing of what's being assessed. And then at that point, if there's not satisfaction around the clarity, we could further modify and even remove certain places or pathways from this. I see Megan's hand is up. Thank you for being patient.
Oh, yes, of course. No, I appreciate the robust conversation on this and all the public input. I've taken a lot of it to heart. I too have similar concerns, I guess. One about sort of transparency and process, and make sure that we are developing a framework that is really clear, that anyone can sort of look at and come to the same logical conclusions, right? And I also sort of feel like there's two things happening here. One, yes, we're trying to develop this roadmap and framework, which is what I was anticipating being asked today to consider, but we've also now jumped into evaluation. And so I think the coupling of those two things has been what has driven some of the concerns from the public. And so my original expectation was, you came up with the draft framework. Today we would adopt a final framework that had a little more of those areas teased out, and then there would be a very comprehensive and transparent sort of evaluation process. And so that's what I would still hope to see, because I think a lot of the conversation really is about the evaluation and the outcomes, and it isn't really clear to me how that has transpired, and sort of what areas were sort of considered on that list, who was involved in the deliberation, sort of how that went. And so, so those are my initial kind of comments. I just want to make sure that we are setting a high standard, that it is something that can be replicated, that the public and sister agencies, tribes, everyone who's committed to this process really understands how decisions are being made through a decision tree. It sounds like there's a lot of sort of nuanced decisions that are happening, and so those need to be really clearly sort of identified, those questions. And so I echo a lot of the comments that Councilmember Jackson shared as well. I think And I don't want to sort of move forward in something and then reconsider to unravel it, right? So I do have some concerns about moving forward with the roadmap as it is today. So I don't know if it's appropriate to ask OPC staff. I know there was a technical advisory group that was formed to provide input on the roadmap itself. And I'm just wondering sort of on the actual evaluation process, if they could sort of describe how that transpired and how sort of what list of protected areas were evaluated and just the process that they undertook to come to the conclusions that they arrived at and that are being presented to us today.
So I'm going to start with this. Thanks for that question, Councilmember Rocha, and then I'm going to send it over to Liz. So the technical advisory panel was tasked with helping us create a robust scientific foundation for this framework. But they were not tasked with going through and evaluating all of these areas to determine whether they were qualifying as a 30 by 30 conserved area. That was a policy decision, and those decisions, as you see them today, were made by and proposed by the Ocean Protection Council, so the staff. So I guess I'll stop there, and then maybe Liz, you could speak to the scientific discussion. Yeah, I'll pause.
I think I might just say what you said in a slightly different meeting, which is, you heard me reference in my science advisor update earlier, just how complex it is working at this science policy interface, where you're asking scientists to come and provide science advice in a policy relevant context, and you're asking policy people to engage with scientists in a different venue. And we've tried to do that with the technical advisory panel, but it was very much about providing science advice into a policy relevant context to enable science-founded decisions, but those are not science decisions. That said, the technical advisory panel and us at Ocean Science Trust would be very happy to continue to engage in applying this framework to do the evaluation in ways that create those venues for continued joint science and policy conversations, if that is useful.
So one of the things one of the points, Megan, that you make is just, how does this evaluation happen? And well, maybe how has it happened, but how does it happen? Because I think that there's an evaluation framework that we need to be more transparent on moving forward as it relates to all of these other potential designations. Listed in the staff report include, again, national wildlife refuges, the estuarine research reserves, ocean portions of national parks and national seashores. So I would very much support, staff coming back with a proposed evaluation criteria on those. I want to draw our attention to the recommendations moving forward, and I think there's at least, three out of four that there's alignment on. The first would be sustain ongoing adaptive management of the state's MPA network. That's underway through the Fish and Game Commission. Again, not driven by 30 by 30, but certainly in, impacts 30 by 30. So that's happening. The second would be support tribally led conservation. I think that there's strong support for that. I think there's different, perspectives on exactly how that manifests, but I think everybody that I've heard, here today wants a tribally led pathway to 30 by 30. I think there's at least, what I'll consider open-mindedness, exploring other designations in conserving biodiversity, but a real concern about what are the criteria, what types of designations are being assessed and under what time frame. So I think that could be fleshed out. And then this question about strengthening biodiversity and conservation in national marine sanctuaries. I think that there's only Chumash National Marine Sanctuary is being considered for inclusion, again, because it from the staff's perspective, took this quantum leap on the explicit framework for collaborative co-stewardship and the biodiversity-focused management plan. And I think the open question, or maybe or difference of opinion, is when do we include this in 30 by 30? Do we do that now and then monitor and adapt, or shift the designation if it doesn't manifest, or do we wait until it does? So I want to get a sense of the group, because we're about 4 hours and 15 minutes into the meeting. So I'm interested in hearing from you, Matt.
Thank you, Secretary Crowfoot. So I love this discussion today and appreciate the robust public input, and thank you, staff, for getting us to this point. That was a tremendous amount of public engagement and work went into crafting this. So the way I'm kind of feeling about this is, and this does reflect conversations I had with the Lieutenant Governor before when we were preparing for this meeting, I see this as the beginning of the process. So, the fact that we are including some areas or evaluating some areas, I still see this as the beginning. And as we move along, we gain more information, study the areas more, see how our policy, the policies that we're implementing are affecting these bedrock values of biodiversity, conservation, we can adjust things moving forward. But I do think that it's important for us to see this as something flexible, that just because we are designating or might be designating some area as a 30 by 30 conservation area doesn't mean it is done and our work is done in those areas. It very much means that it is a beginning of a process to really enhance the conservation benefits in those areas. The other word that jumps out to me is durable. And Secretary Crowfoot, you mentioned a lot of this in your opening comments. We cannot have a durable conservation approach if we're not using a big tent. And so I love the fact that we're bringing in our tribal partners as very much, co-equal partners in management of these areas. And then maybe in some cases, they are the true leaders and we are there to support. So I love that. I think, I come from a background of science, of soil science, so looking at things on lands, and what you mentioned about grazing and that being compatible with some conservation activities is absolutely true. And there are ways that we can blend some of these uses of lands, and in this case, uses of our ocean, and still maintain pretty high conservation benefits and biodiversity benefits. I think, it's on us to really look at it and make sure that we are achieving those benefits. But I think, if we approach conservation as something with a portfolio of options, we will get a lot more benefit to our biodiversity, to our ecosystems, than by perhaps looking at things from a more rigid or more narrow perspective. So I'm very supportive of this approach that is laid out in the roadmap. I do echo some of the concerns about transparency. I think that would just go a long way towards ensuring that the public and our Enviro friends and our EJ friends can feel comfortable with the decisions that are made. So not sure what action or if there's an amendment or whatever that we'd have to do to ensure that at this point, but I do think that is a value that we should ensure is reflected in the roadmap. And I think this is the beginning of a conversation. So I'm excited where we've come. I know we do have a few more years before we get to 2030. That is sort of an arbitrary deadline. So, it is important that we get, that we improve, and we're not just meeting, certain deadlines and checking boxes and that sort of thing. So, but yeah, I'll leave it there. Excited about the conversation that we've had today and where we could go from here.
Thanks so much, Matt. I might suggest, an amended version of the action if it's helpful to move forward, and then just see where we're at, within this vote, and then as needed we can modify. So what I would recommend is, sorry, I need to find the language. Moving to adopt this roadmap for achieving 30 by 30 in California's waters with these amendments. 1, more explicitly incorporate the priority for equitable access within the roadmap, recognizing this is a core priority of 30 by 30. 2, direct staff at the next OPC meeting to come back and specifically report on the evaluation criteria that will be applied to all designations being considered for 30 by 30, which includes the time frame for designations and which designations are under consideration. And then thirdly, with respect to the Chumash National Marine Sanctuary, come back in a reasonable time, certainly within the next 6 to 12 months, to report on the manifestation of the co-management or co-stewardship agreement, and specifically the management plan centered on biodiversity. And then that would help hold ourselves accountable for if that's actually not advancing or not achieving what we believe it will achieve, then we can consider modifications from there. So those are 3 more amendments. More explicitly incorporate equitable access, direct staff at the next meeting to come back with specific evaluation criteria, time frame, and designations under consideration, including what's a transparent process to report out on how that goes. And then lastly, come back with a report on the implementation of the co-stewardship agreement and the management plan with those 12 pieces. So that would be my motion.
I would second that.
Okay. Is there any discussion on that before we call the roll? Okay, let's call the roll.
Yeah, I have a question. So everything else would stand as it is in your motion?
Yes, we would adopt the roadmap as it stands, but also open to any questions you have on the different pieces. I don't want to cut off the discussion.
Well, I just, again, want to understand process. So if that's the case, we're just relying on staff to follow through with those things and then they come back for further adoption, or how does that just process-wise work? I feel like there's some work that needs to happen.
So my motion is to adopt the roadmap, to begin this work moving forward, and but specifically then to, again, the staff to come back with changes to the roadmap incorporating more visibly and at a higher priority level equitable access, to provide a presentation on the evaluation criteria for designations under 30 by 30, and then report on the progress implementing the Chumash Sanctuary Management Plan.
Okay.
All right, so I think we'll call the roll.
Chair Crowfoot.
Yes.
Katie Landau.
Yes.
Matthew Dunlau.
Yes.
Alexis Jackson.
Yes.
Megan Rocha.
No.
Okay, so the ayes have it. Thank you very much for all the folks that have plugged into this conversation. I think Matt put it right, at least in my mind, which is we are at the beginning of this process, and I truly believe and feel motivated to actually ensure that we breathe life into this and come back demonstrating the success of expanded pathways.